introduction to the book, your thoughts about writing the book, or why this book was necessary, is necessary?
Well, first off, the book tracks the fallout between a group of family and friends in New York, some more privileged than others, when one of them, a pregnant woman, goes missing against the backdrop of the pandemic, and her husband becomes a prime suspect. In truth, I did not actually want to write a pandemic novel. I had an encounter, which we can talk about a little later. That made me put down what I had been working on. And the the trick for me was to find a human way into the story that wasn't didactic. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Without giving too much away, and I know you gave us a brief summary, but without giving too much away, can you introduce us to some of the themes of the book?
I don't really think about themes. Usually that's the last thing that comes around for me. I focus on the characters, but I would say that it is called The Rich People Have Gone Away. And so maybe one of the themes is who gets to leave and who gets to stay, and what that means across race and class and gender.
Mhm.
Yes.
Privilege, right? Because I also see that to be a question that the characters ask
Mhm.
in the text: who has privilege and who has the ability to exploit the privilege that they have,
Yes,
right?
definitely.
Tell us about how this book differs from books that you've written in the past, the Travelers.
Mhm. Well, this is my second book, and the first book followed two families, one Irish American, one African American, from the Vietnam War to Obama's first year as president. So that's around what, 40 years. And this novel, I want it to be tightly constructed. So it takes place over the course of about 6 to 8 weeks, even though there are some flashbacks to the past, but it's pretty tightly structured, almost according to real time. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. What kind of reader do you think would most enjoy this book?
I think, well, I can say I love Walter Mosley. It's been a while, honestly, since I read his more recent works, but like Devil in a Blue Dress, I think it was Black Betty. Um, I like mystery, I like literary mystery. So if you like a literary mystery that explores issues of class and race, but not that moves away from some of the more familiar tropes, this will be for you. If you like literary fiction, of course, I love Toni Morrison. I love Zora Neale Hurston, Patricia Highsmith. I believe that story should be accessible. So um, I think it's a book for everyone, but it's also specifically for people who I want to say care about other people in relationships and our flaws, our human flaws, yeah, in
I
relationship.
saw the book to be a book about community and relationships, almost very reminiscent of Gloria Naylor's Bailey's Cafe, right?
Uh-huh.
Where each
That's a
character
compliment.
takes on, well, it's a phenomenal book. And for those audience members that have not read it, I do want to encourage you to read it. For those that have read it, I want to encourage you to go back and reread it in light of what you've learned about the characters and what takes place in the text. Um, so yeah, um, the connection, I saw a clear connection to Gloria, or reference to Gloria Naylor's Bailey's Cafe, where each character has their own specific story, and that story guides a lot of the conversations that take place within the book, right? Without spoiling anything for us, can you share a surprising or unexpected moment in the book that you think will captivate readers?
Well, there's one that would be too big of a surprise, so I can't share that one. But that would be a spoiler. But that's a tough question. Um, Mm. You know, I was actually surprised by the argument on the mountain and the first one to actually lose their temper in terms of a physical act. There is a fallout in a friendship, and I was surprised at the moment that one character makes a decision to do something that I think crosses a line in a friendship, but also going back to your point of privilege, mistakenly thinks the friend will understand later and forgives. Um, I really don't set out saying this is a good character, a bad character, because I think a teacher once told me your heroes will only ever be as good as your villains, and I try to remember that when I'm writing. So when the character made that decision, it was shocking to me, and that the character continued, you know, on and justified making that decision. I was like, oh, really? Really? How is this going to resolve itself? Yeah.
So what you're saying to me is kind of giving me Toni Morrison and also James Baldwin talk about how these characters have stories and these characters become people that press upon you as the author to write or create their story. Can you tell us a little bit about how you developed your characters and if any of them surprised you during your writing?
Well, first off, I'll tell you, I guess the origin begins with my taking a walk to Park Slope in April 2020. It's about like a 15-minute walk from my house for to run an errand. And it was at the height of COVID, and I wanted to get out of the house, and I noticed that everything was just really, it was eerily quiet, like The Walking Dead or 28 Hours or something. No people around, but an overwhelming smell of cleansers. And I had this moment where I encountered another African American woman, and she was homeless and she was in a bad mental state. And then I noticed, oh my goodness, I'm seeing other homeless people. So there were people like myself who were rushing on specific errands and bent on getting back to our nice, homes. And there were other people who were out there in the street, and we didn't know what was going to happen with this pandemic. We sort of thought the world was going to end. And I couldn't focus after that on the novel that I was working on. But I didn't want to tell her story because she wasn't there, and I'm sensitive about exploiting people's stories. And I just kept trying to put it out of my mind. But then Theo appeared in a doorway. So the long answer is it sometimes starts for me with a visual image or a question. Theo appears in the doorway, and I ask, why is he standing in the doorway? Oh, he likes to have sex in doorways. Well, it's a pandemic. That's an interesting complication. And it's coming organically. So this I can delve into. What kind of doorway is he? How, is he in? Where does he live? And it just goes from there. Yes.
Great. I really feel like different audiences are going to respond to this book in different ways,
Yeah.
right? The writers are going to see that exigency or that how the chapter starts. And it
Mhm.
starts with Mr. Harper takes sex in doorways, halts
Mhm.
lovers at the threshold of his front door, left hand on shoulder, right hand on hip. He searches the ninth floor hallway for furtive eyes before pressing the whole of himself into the tender nook of his lover's ass, right? It just starts off with so much energy and excitement, and it leaves readers with questions. I do think also those of us that are literary critics or like to dig deeper into the literature, we're going to be so much engaged with what happens within the text and why is Theo like this and who does he represent. So I say that to say I love the construction of this book and how it engages different audiences and different types of personas. One of the conversations that I see taking place within the book is a conversation around sex and sexuality.
Yes.
Um, So my question is, what led you to explore these ideas, and how did you research or dive into that subject within the book?
Well, Theo's sexuality, Theo is polyamorous, and so is his wife up until a point. She's pregnant in the book, so things sort of shift when uh, 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 person becomes pregnant. Sometimes the family dynamics shift. Um, but I think, I'm going to be on a panel tomorrow in honor of James Baldwin. I must also tip my hat to him in another country because I think that James Baldwin, in the way he dealt with sexuality, opened doors that allows us so much more permission, especially artists of color, than we had in the past. And so he in another country was dealing or writing about sexual fluidity and open relationships. So I'm just looking at it through a different lens and a different time and era. So
I love
yes,
that. And in
yes,
honor of James Baldwin's 100th celebration, well, 100th anniversary of his birth, I love that nod. I saw Theo with his polyamorous, um, polysexual behavior. Uh, I think as a character, he enters into so many contemporary conversations about sexuality and identity, sexuality and gender, which guide our ideas about identity, right?
yes, he
I'll
does.
take this question from the chat. Professor Walker Jones says, thank you for your time today. How do you make decisions about the inclusion of cultural indexes as cultural issues often change?
I follow characters. I follow uh they change and they don't change. I follow the characters and what I find is that because I live in a diverse world and I have a diverse group of friends, there's like a natural cultural exchange and I get to see um uh where people are more fluid and where there's sort of a wall. So I always base it on the character's background. That's going to tell me the kind of conversations they can or cannot have.
Mhm. I'll even admit, even your response is very Baldwin-esque, right? In the sense that Baldwin was concerned with individuals' connections to others and
Right.
how individuals are transmuted by their relationships with other
Yes.
individuals and spaces. So I love that idea and that conversation. Because Shira Watson asks, how long did it take you to write the book?
Oh my goodness, from start. So I went on that walk in April 2020 and the book came out in April 2024. And there were periods where I had to stop and then I picked it up again. So I'd say um I went to a residency in 2022 with a draft. So with a rough draft, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
One of the conversations at the back of the book indicates that this book developed out of a smaller essay that you wrote for, forgive me, for a magazine.
Yeah.
And that essay's Daily Cleanse. Can you talk to us a little bit about how a small story becomes a large story or becomes this complicated book?
Well, when I look back at Daily Cleanse now, it actually became the first chapter of the book. Almost every character that we meet in the book is referenced in that chapter. And then I went back because as writers, we surprise ourselves, right? And I thought, let me see. And I went back at and looked at the travelers, and that's the same case for um one of the early chapters, the first chapter in that novel too. So I believe that writers always portray ourselves like there is a method to our madness, and we don't always know what it is. But when you get to the end, and sometimes you go back to the beginning, that's when you see it. That's why I often tell students, do not spend weeks and weeks just rewriting chapter or a scene. I'm a big believer in just moving forward, because sometimes you don't know the beginning until you get to the end.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well said. Well said. Right. Um, there's a question here from Tamanika. She asks, "What is it like being an author?"
What is it like being an author? It requires discipline. Uh, it requires a built-in structure, because no one's going to do the writing for you, and no one's going to make you sit down and write. You have to get there and sit down on your own. It requires humility, because once I've written it, it's now yours. It's not mine anymore. It's yours for to interpret, to love, hate, or do what you will with it. So it requires humility, and it requires uh faith, that faith in terms of faith in believing that there are people out there who will get what you're trying to do and appreciate it. And fate, as in FATE, it's up to the universe to a certain degree. So uh, it's I don't gamble, but I sometimes think, oh my gosh, for someone who doesn't gamble, I've chosen a career that's definitely a gamble.
Right. I
Yeah.
love it. I love it. Taking more questions from the audience. Um, Professor McKendra says, "How do you test your scenes to see if they're coming alive? What do you do when a scene stalls? Do you think about them beat by beat, or do you let the drama play out in your mind and then try to record it faithfully?"
I do a couple of things. Sometimes if I'm stuck, my younger self would just try to will myself through it. I'm gonna get it and I'm gonna do it, and it would turn stilted or forced. So that's where the blind faith comes in, and that's when knowing sometimes to get up and walk away and do something else, like walk the dog or go for a walk, helps. Some writers stop, for example, when things are good, like so just before they get to the big scene, so they will have something else to look forward to the next day. Music plays a big part in my writing. So sometimes I think I write almost according to a song, like with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so music helps me. And so I think in terms of beats. And okay, so oh, I've gotten to this point. I don't know the bridge yet, so I have to go away, you know, or whatever. So yeah.
Nice,
Mm.
nice. One question is, how do you keep the mystery in your story while trying to help readers understand the core message?
Um, I write the story, and sometimes I don't know what's going to happen. I don't write a detailed outline. So, say some of the big surprises, like I might know someone is a relative, but I don't necessarily know how things are going to play out. So in the same way that the reader is surprised, I permit myself to be surprised too. uh that's harder sometimes, because again, I'm writing on blind faith and I'm following the characters, and it would be easier to have a detailed outline. Once I get a rough draft, and I went to I went to UCross with the rough draft. Then I will sit and I will go back and I will outline and do what's called novel math, tracking the characters' ages, their relationships, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Nice. I and thinking about how the characters, the information that we get about the characters in the text, I could just imagine that there's this complex interplay between you and your agent and your editor, where there's this continual questioning that helps you to refine some of the scenes and some of the dialogue. Because what I saw in the book is I saw the characters' backgrounds are really sketched out, and their relationships between each other, with other individuals, that relationship is clarified and presented to the reader as if the reader should understand these relationships before they get and understand the character and see who they are and their motivation. So I want to say that was very well done. Very
Oh,
well.
thank you. Thank you.
Here's a question. It says, you have a background in playwriting. How did your work in that form prepare you for writing novels? And are there ways in which your background as a playwright has made novel writing more challenging?
Um, I think that my background as a playwright, the dialogue helps. I don't really have to think much about how people speak, and maybe because I'm always sort of listening, and so when Theo came to me, his voice came to me, and then just the natural, no two people speak the same way, and I learned that uh at a pretty young age from listening to people. So dialogue comes naturally. One of the challenges was learning to write physical description. I think sometimes when you're making that adjustment, you tend to overwrite physical description. And so I had to find the balance that worked for me. Yeah.
It's interesting that you say that because there are so many of the characters that I can physically imagine, from
Yes.
Zay in the Cardi B t-shirt
Yes.
to Nadine,
Yes.
to Ruby.
Yeah.
But then when I think about Theo, I think attractive man,
Mhm.
but those descriptions, those descriptives are not 100% clear. Maybe he's tall, maybe he's, I want to say he's dark, but not necessarily, he's just olive complected in color. I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is I didn't see a clear physical representation of Theo, but I think that's purposeful. And correct me if I'm wrong. I'm thinking it's because you want the audience, the reader individually, to come up with whatever is attractive, to place Theo into that attractiveness space, as opposed to dictating that he's this height, that he's this weight, that he's this specific color or complexion, and that people respond to him physically in this way.
Yeah.
What are your
I,
thoughts?
that's very true. It's fascinating because some people will say, well, Theo has blonde hair and blue eyes. And I'm like, okay, oh, really? And then some people will say, well, Theo's dark skinned. And I'll say, oh, really? So it's fascinating to see what people project onto him. And I think, though, that's a result of he is racially ambiguous. And so, do you know what I'm saying? So I think in a different light, he could look on certain days different ways. There's actually even a scene when another character holds her arm up to his and he takes offense to it and she goes, oh, look, we're almost the same color, you know. So
That
yeah.
30% peeking through, right?
Yeah.
Which is
Yeah.
another conversation that we can engage in as far as, ancestral lineages and
Mhm.
how we are just products of our,
Yeah.
ancestral lineage, right?
Yeah.
But Theo suffers with a lot of that, in that cognitive space where he's aware that one of his ancestors were Black,
Yes.
is Black.
Mhm.
But that impacts him in a whole other way because that kind of puts up a wall
Mhm.
in his relationships with other individuals, but it's a huge part of his identity. Once again, him and Darla have those conversations about being the 30%, having 30% within them, and how that 30% dictates or impacts behavior
Yes.
responses. Right.
Yes.
Okay, back to questions. Here's a question. Is there ever a time where you just wanted to give up on writing?
Yes, there was a time actually when I did, and there's a very well-known playwright. I always say her name because there would be no books uh, without her. I was having lunch with the playwright Lynn Nottage, and I said, "Oh, I haven't been writing," and she said, "Well, Regina, there's time. You should just write. Just take a workshop. It doesn't matter even how good the teacher is or even where it is, just write and see what happens." And she said, "Oh, I think I passed a place that was having workshop classes." And I went, and three of the stories ended up being what I used to apply to the Owl Writers Workshop with. So so yes, so there was a time, yes.
Okay. This next question comes from Miss Octavia Wilson. She says, Wilkinson, I apologize. Would you be interested in seeing your novel on screen?
Um, yes, if it's done like American fiction.
I see the hesitancy. What was that? What was that? Say no more, please. Please expand.
If the integrity is there, the love of the work is there, or the characters are allowed, uh it- when you because I've also written for television. I think when you hand the work over, you have to release it. So I would want it to be released into the right hands, because then it does sort of become the director's vision, do you know? So and that's important. So I would want it to be someone like Cord Jefferson, who really, I thought he did a lovely job with Percival Everett's work, and I'm also a huge Percival Everett fan. So yeah.
Yes. I read Percival Everett during my grad days,
Mhm.
and I loved seeing it on the screen in this new adaptation that's just been put forth. So I agree with what you said, as far as it depends on the hands in which it's in.
Yes.
If they could personalize that experience and still keep that truth, that respect for the literature, but also the conversations that are taking place, right? Um, this is a question that says, how would you imagine your characters?
How would I imagine the ones that exist, or I
And feel free to edit that question. Maybe the question is, how do you create or include or consider your characters within for inclusion within the book, within the text?
well, a lot of times they stalk me. Like, as I said, I did not want to write about the pandemic, but I couldn't focus. And then I had this visual of this man in a doorway who likes to have sex, and there's a pandemic and he can't have sex, and then he's in a relationship, and so then and I think, oh, she's pregnant, and wait, he loves cities, she is having that fear that so many people had of, I want to get out of the city. And so there's immediately class issues within marriage, which is really sort of and issues of privilege from two privileged people, right? And one is internalizing that privilege in a way that makes him uncomfortable, because he's never dealt with his Black lineage, and now he's seeing on the news people are dying, and there are not enough ventilators, but he can't go out and distract himself and do some of the things he likes to do. And so he's forced to sit and wrestle with that, which brings up really complicated feelings about leaving the city and why they're leaving the city.
Mhm.
And
No.
so I just follow the characters really in there. I say, why would this character do this? Or if I have a character play an instrument, like um,
Darla.
Darla plays the bassoon, I will go and I will do research on the type of personality who plays a bassoon, because that's called the clown of the orchestra. So that tells me Darla has a little bit of a sense of humor. And if you open that instrument out, it's about what, 8 feet long. And I imagine her as being petite, but it's a heavy instrument. So she's petite, but she's strong, right? So these contradictions. So I think about the physicality of characters, and I think about characters' jobs, because I forget there which writer said that, but jobs are important, and sometimes, especially young writers, they don't think about it. A stay-at-home mom has a job and a structure to her life. And these things help me imagine a character and make that character real.
Hey, thank you. This next question, which is connected to characterization also, it's how do you test your characters to make sure that they're coming to life? And maybe you've already
I
mentioned,
think
how do
that's the overlap in that. I don't, I can tell if they're coming to life by if the dialogue is stilted, or I put them in a situation too and I don't recognize them, or it just doesn't feel organic. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, for our audience members, I would like to take this time to open up our chat space. Feel free to put questions within the chat box that I could ask for Miss Regina Porter. I'm just looking for questions, and I'll go back to my questions if I don't have any audience member questions. Okay. Okay. Talk to us about your writing process. What does your writing habit look like?
It changes from book to book, as I said, uh with the travelers. I'm surprised after the travelers, I'm surprised I'm not deaf, because I would put on my earphones and go to uh the bookstore. No, I'm sorry, not the bookstore, the coffee shop in Iowa, and be there by 9 and work from like 9 to 1 and blast music. Um uh uh, and then stop for lunch, then go back, and then it was like a 9 to 5 day. And sometimes after dinner, I would go back, because I was determined if I was to travel back and forth between Iowa, I was going to have a book when I graduated. Um, with this book, it also took, I guess, really about 2 years, because I said 2000, April 2020, and then I went for that walk in August 2022, I think it was. I went to Ucross. So yeah, it's been, wow, I didn't think about that, but it wasn't because of the pandemic that I did not write in coffee shops or anything. I was at home, and I think that was a big change. Like most people, largely confined to being at home. So my structure and my attention span, I think all of our attention spans changed. I could not sit and write from 9 to 12. If I wrote for 40 minutes, that was good. If I wrote for 20 minutes, that was good. There were more spurts. So, and I don't know what the third book will be like. Yeah, what that process will be like. Mhm.
Before we get to the third book, the question here, you were talking about music and playlists. So the question is, what music or artist do you listen to?
Well, now, there's a character in the book who loves Prince. And I
I got
remember,
that. Yeah.
yeah, I was at Iowa when Prince died, and I remember sitting around one of the workshop tables, and one of the teachers is like, "Man, Prince is dead. I can't believe Prince is dead." And I have a niece, loves Prince, just was devastated when he died. And she's like, "I can't believe Prince." I can't believe Prince is dead. So Prince, oh my goodness, I love all things Stevie Wonder. I'm sort of all over the place. I like classical music, so I like Beethoven, I like Chopin, and I will go from one to the other. I like jazz, Branford Marsalis, Winston Marsalis, and I'm trying to think of everyone. Um, uh, I love Gladys Knight because I get that from my folks. I love that sort of, and and sometimes Nadine, if you ask me about Nadine, I think of Gladys Knight for some reason. I don't know. Just I'm all over the place. Right now I'm into Kendrick Lamar because of the sort of call and response aspect of his Not Like Us. Do you know, there seems to me that there is something related to church in that video, and the history and the migration of African Americans from the South to the North to, I'm thinking of like Isabel Wilkerson's forgetting the name of the book, but yeah, just all over so I sit and I listen to that almost obsessively, and I don't yet know completely what will come of listening to it, but I'm figuring something out. Yeah.
Love it, right? And I also love the contemporary conversations that you have with the rap girlies, Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion, right? Like at the end of the text, there's that understanding that Nadine comes to that gives her some understanding of Zay Zay and why he prioritizes these individuals, right? These
Well, I love Cardi B because Cardi B, I mean, mm, Cardi B is only ever herself, and it took and Zay Zay has to navigate some spaces where he is one of a handful of people of color, and he has to code switch a lot. And so it took me a minute. That's why when you say, well, what are cultural themes, it took me a minute to go, oh, that's his armor in a way, that's his comfort. Cardi B, no matter how one feels about Cardi B, I have huge respect for her because she's always herself. Do you know what I'm saying? Um and it's a reminder to Zay Zay of something, and it's something that his mother has to learn too. There's no one, I think the mother says at one point, because she wants him, she goes, I wish you would wear a Bay shirt or a Drake shirt, which is kind of funny. That's ironic. But 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 then she says, well, I guess there's more than one way to be a woman. And I think that's very important.
Nice, thank you. Another question I have here is, do you have any advice for parents to foster and encourage young children who have expressed a desire to write a book?
Um, mm, I'd say take them to bookstores, buy them books, take, if they have any favorite authors, take them uh to readings or events. We have YouTube now, so and virtuals like this. So if they can't be there physically, they can go there online. Tell them to have some, find out who their mentors are, right? Because we've discussed how challenging writing can be. And so there are people that I look back to who paved the way, like Zora Neale Hurston, Octavia Butler, Patricia Highsmith, who were doing Baldwin. And so I have those folks as a reference, right? And living friends. But yes, I would for sure have them spend time in the library, have them uh figure out some of the people they like, buy books. I know, like say, Iowa has a workshop class during the summer for young writers, so maybe have them take a writing class. When they're young, the best thing sometimes too is to just look at people and relationships. There's so much life happening around us, and you know, some of the nuance from my writing comes from appreciating things when I was 20. I could never have appreciated, right? I remember once a friend said, well, uh, I had a teacher who said, most writers don't reach their prime until after their 40s. And I was like, 40, that's ancient. Don't tell me that. I was so pissed. But now I'm like, yeah. Yeah.
Nice. This question is, what is a goal that you would like to accomplish within the next year concerning your writing career?
A next goal that I would like to accomplish. I would like to figure out why I'm watching these videos. You know, why I'm listening to this one song almost compulsively, what I'm trying to figure out. But it usually comes to me when I walk away, just like I said, I think I'm in I'm promoting the book now, so it's not feasible that I can't sit down and write because my brain is functioning in two different ways. So I would guess probably around the holidays, maybe uh uh I can sit in creative mode, and maybe in the next year uh have like a clear idea of what the next thing is I want to write. Yeah, yeah.
Connected with that is, what advice would you give to inspiring writers?
Um, the same thing I said earlier, read a lot. I know, and young people don't like to do it, I'm told, quite as much. Honestly, watch good streaming shows, because a lot of the better television series function almost like narratives, and I think that they help me visually when I write. So maybe read, also maybe look at some of the shows and films. I cited American Fiction, where the adaptations were well done for the times that you can't read. I haven't done it with my current students yet, but I love when you go to a museum, the little physical descriptions of the art. I think they're exquisitely written. I think the uh the folks who write those are artists themselves, because of how they convey information and how concisely they have to convey information. And so if I had the time, I would take the students and just spend the day looking at some of those. And I might do that if I were a writer. It's a wonderful way to learn how to write, I think, physical description. Yeah.
Right, thank you. Once again, audience, I'll just ask that you engage the chat box if you have any questions as we sort of stream towards a close. The next question that I have for you, Ms. Porter, is about your editing process. So the
Mhm.
question is, during your editing process, were there characters who didn't make the cut or who were drastically changed? And how did you make those decisions?
Mm. You know, in both the travelers and the rich people have gone away, most of the characters have stayed. I don't know what that says, but yeah, they've stayed, maybe because they're kind of the connections, they end up being central to the story. So my editor never saw this, and there are two chapters that my editor never saw, because one of them I lost and I didn't find until afterwards, and it had Julian, a scene with Julian, his with a character named Julian. Zay he's more like an uncle, but he's a cousin, and Nadine and Irvin coming back from a dance concert because Julian is was a dancer and is now a teacher, a choreography teacher, excuse me. That one I lost, and it probably would have been too much, and it could also be that I come back later from another angle and tackle Julian's story because he fascinates me. So I think that sometimes when things don't happen or I lose them for a reason. Like literally, it was lost, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't find it. And then I find it, and it's too late. But that means there's a connection somewhere, and maybe I'm going to revisit Julian and Julian's life at another time. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not the pandemic. Do you know?
Yes. Yeah. Question from the chat here. It says, your novels have allowed you to share the stage at bookstores and festivals with many other authors. With whom did you find yourself to be in the most harmonious conversation?
Oh, that's a, I don't have one that's like most harmonious. They're all very different. I can't answer that because there's not one. They're
I have
all,
another good one. How about this? Which
mhm.
author, dead or alive, would you be the most nervous to edit or critique your work? Well, let's say critique, not necessarily edit. Which author, dead or alive, would you be the most nervous for them to edit, critique your work?
Toni Morrison.
Now,
Toni
say some
Morrison.
more, please. The
Yeah,
mother herself, right?
yeah. Toni Morrison. Yeah.
I think the critiques would be fruitful, but yeah, if she said too much, maybe it would be crushing in the sense that you're like, wow, I have lots to do or lots to fix. But then
Yes,
maybe she didn't say enough.
precisely.
Like, oh my gosh, did she like it? Is she interested in it? Does this fit her,
Yeah,
standards?
yeah.
Nice. I love that question. I love that question. Here's just another humanizing question. Do you do anything before writing to get the juices flowing?
I walk my dog. I'm when I when I am into the writing, I can have 5 to 7 cups of coffee a day, and then I go down. Like right now, I'm only having 1.5 to 2 cups, right? But yeah, and I dance. Sometimes that's another thing. If I'm stuck, I'm a big believer of just dancing around the house, and sometimes a song will help me um, drop into character. Like I listened to the Supremes' Love Child, and it helped me to understand Eloise in The Travelers. Like I listened to it in the same way that, and obsessively almost. And I thought, oh, I get her. It really helped me visualize her. Yes. And
Okay.
emotional too. Yeah. Mhm.
This next question says, besides home or a coffee shop, where are some other places that you like to write?
Home, coffee shop. I mean, those are the two main places. Sometimes I'm not so good. I used to go to the main branch of if I'm researching, I did some research at the Schomburg. I'll go for research, I'll go to libraries more, but it's hard for me to just sit and write in a library. I do better in coffee shops or home. Yeah. Or
Okay.
at a residency. Rewriting residency is better because it shifts the energy for me. I know I'm in editing mode a little more. Yeah.
All right. Colleagues, I'll just take any final culminating questions in the chat. Okay. Ms. Porter, What questions or ideas do you hope linger with readers after they finish the book?
Um, I, hmm, well, I'm hopeful. Do you know, you see, I think sometimes the younger generation gets they've had to see so much, and I don't want to become emotional, and I think they get a bad rep between the technology intake and everything. But I think I don't want to spoil the ending. There's a reason that I ended it where I did, because I also think they have the future. And I think they're also kind of wonderful. And sometimes they see things like Theo, like, I'm sorry, Zay does, right? That the older generation doesn't see. So I am inherently, regardless of what happens to me individually, I have a collective sense of hope for all of us, and that's in part through a faith in what the future generations. You must have that. That's part of that in of itself is part of healthy activism. And so I hope that there's a reason. I think I named a chapter The Power of We. I share Baldwin's belief that if one part of society is ill, all of society is ill, and so that uh, we must try to find ways to come together and figure out um, uh, what connects us more than what divides us. And younger people are often more open in a way to doing that. I I hope we will see, but that's my personal belief. And yeah,
All right,
and
look, this may be our final question, okay?
mhm.
Well, Langston Hughes in The Racial Artist in the Negro Mountain talks about the fact that authors cannot divorce themselves from writing about their backgrounds or their pasts or their experiences.
Mhm.
So this question comes from a commenter and asks, do any of your characters share a part of who you are?
All of them do. I mean, I have to Theo. It's Theo, obviously. I mean, he is. He's a male character. He is, but Ruby, every single one, because I have to, in order for them to be real, I have to tap into some aspect of myself and challenge my own beliefs. So, but it's never autobiographical. Like, that's why I always laugh when people say, well, it's this person or it's that person. No, 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 no. It's that person, and it may be a little bit of that person, but the second you put a character down on the page, they're fiction. And if they're too autobiographical, then you've failed in some way, in my opinion. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Audience, as we close out this discussion, Ms. Porter, you want to give us any final culminating words about the texts and close us out? Go
Oh, well, listen, it was nice to be here. I hope you'll buy the book out. I hope you'll read it. I hope you'll enjoy it. And yeah, that's it.
All right. Well, thank you so much on behalf of the Six Bridges Book Festival, on behalf of the Central Arkansas Library System, and on behalf of Philander Smith University. We definitely thank you for this experience. Audience, if you have not yet read this book, go read this book. Right. Once again, it brings us back to a time that we just left as a culture and as a community, COVID 19, 2020, and it introduces us to a community of individuals that have interpersonal relationships that are conflicted and difficult, but they all have their individual challenges and struggles too, right? Thank you so much.
Thank you.